but it consisted of the three primaries, and my weird interpretation of that. For my yellow, I was using Naples Yellow Deep. For my red, I was using Opera Rose. And for my blue, I was using a blue-green, Cobalt Turquoise Light. And believe it or not, using those three colors, you can really get anything you want. And I still use those three colors when I do industrial paintings. In fact, the one that got the award at New Jersey Watercolor was an industrial piece using those three colors. When you mix them together, you can get anything you really want. But for most of my work, I use just a regular palette. I found that it was a little too limiting to use those, just those three colors. So today I'm going to use just what I normally use, which is a bunch of stuff here that changes from year to year, day to day, depending on if I find something else I like. So what I'm going to do for you today is an autumn scene. I have it drawn out here partially. This is going to be a tree that's lost some of its leaves, still has some of its leaves on, and I'm going to just start painting. If you have any questions while I'm painting, just let me know. I'm going to try to keep talking as I paint. First thing I'm going to do is going to put some leafy areas on this tree where the leaves have not fallen off yet. So I'm using some orangey yellow here, and I'm just putting it on, usually using more or less like the side of my brush, just to get sort of a scrapey effect.
Just keep painting them.
Yeah.
See, someone's getting a shadow of some type, and I don't know where it's coming from. I think it may be the strap.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Just keep.
All right, I'll just keep going. All right, now this tree has lost a lot of its leaves, but it's still got a few there. So I'm going to just put these in. That's the reason I didn't put any more limbs and branches up there. I'm just going to do that as I go along. And that should do it for the first coat. Now, you're all watercolorists, I guess, mainly, and you know that you work from light to dark. So what I'm going to do is put basically all the light values down first, all the sunlit values. Now, the sun, I always have to know where the sun's coming from, and I usually make up my own lighting to give me the most advantage in my painting. So I'm going to have the sun coming from the left.
Spotlight over the ceiling. That's
Change that.
So I'm going to have the sun coming from the left, hitting the tree this way, and that's going to throw some nice shadows down in front of the barn and onto the barn. So for now, it's just going to be a lot of fairly uninteresting painting because I just have to get those light values down. Now for the tree trunk, I'm going to use just some raw umber here. I'm just going to paint on. I always think in terms of where the sun is hitting as far as where the lighting's coming from, so I always put the sunlit value on first. And that's usually a fairly light value, fairly light whatever color I'm using, and it's usually a warm color. And the logic of that, of course, is wherever the sun hits, it will tend to be warmer. So for now, I'm just going to extend a few of these branches up. And notice I didn't put the sky in yet because I wanted to keep the orange as pure as possible. And a lot of times the sky in my paintings, I just use it as a sort of a fill-in in the background. I'm going to hopefully put more trees in here and things like that. And I don't mind painting around things like this too much. I don't mind the way it looks. I never use biscuit or anything like that. I would rather paint around something and get sort of a sloppy edge, and to me that looks okay. So now I'm going to just bring a few more of these up, and I'll add some more of these later, but for now that looks pretty good. Okay, now I have a stone wall here too, so I'm just going to put some of that light warm value on this stone wall. Because of the way the light is, the sunlight is coming, some of this wall is going to be in shadow. But for now, I want to keep, wherever the sun is going to be hitting the wall, I want to keep that nice and light and warm. And I have a few stones here that are going to be in the grass. These I'm also going to give a coating of the of the sienna, raw umber, that's what it is, or raw sienna, one or the other. They're all kind of interchangeable. One's a little darker, one's a little more orangey. Okay, a little bit more stone wool here, and then I'm going to go to my yellow ochre, which is another variation of those earth tones, and just put that in for the foundation of the barn. I'm going to keep the barn white because I want to get some nice shadows on the barn from the tree. And not that you can't do it on a red barn, but the white is going to be even more dramatic, I think, especially with a fall scene. So this barn has all these little foundations here. And here we're going to have some wood piles in there, getting ready for the winter. So I'm just going to put a little warm tone in there. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to put some tone on the roof of the barn. Now, a combination of colors that I've been using now for a while that I like is ultramarine blue and a cheap Joe color. This one is American Journey colors. It's called Raw Umber Violet. And it gives you a nice sort of a violety gray when you mix it with the blue. This is what I'm using now on the roof. And you can mix it lighter or darker and get a lot of variations. I'm going to use this for all my shadows, except the shadows on the grass, which have to go green. But this is a nice, it's a nice combination if you need a value that's variable and you don't want to have a lot of different colors. So in this case, I'm making a sort of a black or a gray roof in sunshine. So this will be its light value. I'm going to paint around these little areas of the tree. And let's see, the barn ends about here. I kind of have the barn ending behind the tree. It's a little hard to see. Kind of forgot what I did. So now I'm going to just finish that off. And that looks pretty good. Okay. One more little spot here I forgot. I'm going to have a little bit of a sort of a dirt path or something here. This is the boring part of the painting. All you're doing is, basically just putting on these light values. I'm going to have another little stone wall here I forgot about here. Okay. All right. Now I got a few trees that are going to be growing behind this other tree. So I'm going to just put in a few, again, light and bright trunks. And I'm just going to put those in quickly. No details or anything. Get a little more paint on that. And like that. And then we have another tree here. I'm going to put some leaves on that a little later, but for now, just get a little tone on there. Okay. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to put the sky in. And the reason I didn't do it first is I wanted to keep this orange as kind of orangey as possible. If I put the blue down first, then the orange goes over, it becomes duller. So I wanted to keep it a little bit lighter. So I got some fresh water here because there's a little color in that water. I'm going to turn this over because if I don't, I'm going to wind up getting drips. So I'm going to take a pretty good sized brush here, and I'm going to use a blue that I've been using in place of cerulean blue. It's made by Holbein, and it's called Horizon Blue. And it's similar to cerulean, but it has a little bit more punch to it. It's a little bit more interesting as a blue. And I add a little bit of alizarin to it, just to grade it slightly. And now with a big wet brush, I'm just going to put in this blue area, which is going to be the entire background, some of which will be covered by trees later.
What kind of paper is that?
This is Kilimanjaro, Cheap Joe's, 300 pounds. I find I used Arches for many, many years, and I liked it, but I started using this, and I like it better. And it's about the same price, and it takes a lot of abuse. Like if you want to scrub areas out or scratch into it or whatever. It's a good strong paper. And I used to buy 140-pound paper and then excuse me, then stretch it. But I got too lazy, so I just buy the 300-pound. I used to not like to work on 300 pounds when I didn't have as much experience because it's a little, I don't know, it's a little, it's a different kind of a surface, and it sometimes was a little intimidating, but now that I've been doing this for so many years, it doesn't seem so bad, so I use it.
Is it cold press?
Yeah. Yeah, it's cold press paper, and I don't stretch it because you don't have to because of its weight. I don't take the sizing off it. Some people like to do that. I don't mind having the sizing on it.
You almost work dry to wet.
I don't use a lot of wet and wet. The only time I use wet and wet is if I want things to blend together. Like right now, I'm going to blend a little bit different blue into this blue, so you'll see a little bit of wet and wet. But mostly I work on dry paper. It gives you a lot more control. If you're working on wet paper and you're not 100% sure what you're doing, you can get into trouble and get things that run in together and get kind of messy. So I avoid that if I can. So that's why I have a big brush and I'm using quite a bit of water.
That's upside down.
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't have drips coming down into it. I'm going to put it back the other way in a minute. Okay. Okay, now, just to make this guy a little more interesting, I'm going to take some ultramarine and mix it with the horizon. Make it a little darker, add a little alizarin, give it a little more punch. And now this is going to be the part of the sky that are not clouds. The initial blue I put down are going to be the areas of clouds. As you know, clouds are never pure white. And by using these two blues, you can get an effect of clouds, and the rest would be just open sky without clouds. And the clouds are not going to be an important part of this painting, so I'm just going to do it fairly simple. It's a quiet group. No questions? No?
What kind of brushes are you using?
I'm using, again, Cheap Joe's. I don't work for Cheap Joe's, I just like his work, his stuff. These are called dream catchers. They're a dream catchers. They're that's his brand and his make. They are a combination of nylon and sable. So they give you the spring of a nylon brush, and they give you the capacity for holding water and paint that a sable does. And they're not as expensive as a sable. Okay, well that's drying. I'm going to go into the green. Now the green I use is a little weird, some people think. It's called cadmium green pale. It's actually a gouache. It's the watercolor version of it I don't care for. It doesn't have enough body. So I use the gouache and I just thin it down with a lot of water. And as you can see, it's a very bright brassy green. It's got a lot of yellow in it. And it's a good green to start with. I always like to start with a brassier color, and then if you want to, you could always tone it down by putting a little blue over it or something like that. But if you start with a color that's dull already, then you can't get it to get bright and brassy if you want to. So if you start this way, you've got it already done. weird until I get the shadows on it, so don't be concerned. And as you can see, I'm not wetting the paper first because if you do, it kind of dilutes the pigment a little too much. And I want my green, even my sunlit green, which this is, to be somewhat darker than the sky, which is what happens in the real world. And as you can see, this is just a matter of mopping it on. And once I get this done, I'll start to get into the more interesting aspects of what I hopefully will be doing for you today. Okay, the first thing I want to do is I have a tendency to always put my hand in the wet paint and make a mess. I want to dry it first. So this is the only time I ever get to use one of these. So just bear with me. Okay, now what I want to do is start putting the secondary values on. I'm going to start with the tree because that's pretty much the star of the show here, the tree and then the barn. So I have my sunlit value, and so now I'm going to think about where the sun's coming from. And I told you earlier that it's coming from the left, coming down, hitting the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a darker mixture of that orange. I'm going to use some alizarin in with it. And what I'm going to do is imagine these leaf areas as being three-dimensional, as having roundness this way, having roundness this way. So if the sun's coming from this direction, the right sides of these leaf areas and the undersides would tend to be darker because of the shape turning away from the source of sun. So now I'm going to darken those areas where the sun would not be hitting these areas in full force.
Sun is from your left.
Yeah, sun's coming from this direction. And what I try to do is start at the area that I believe would be the darkest area and work my way up into the sunlight. And as I get up into the sunlight, the strokes get smaller and smaller until they just blend into the light areas. And I don't do too much. You can always add this. You can always add darker values to your watercolor, but if you go too far and you put too much dark in too quickly, then you know you've got a problem. So.
Is that a caramel red?
A what?
What color red is that?
I'm using alizarin mixed with the orange that I used.
What color is the orange?
It's actually marigold orange, marigold yellow, which is, it's a Winsor Newton color, marigold yellow.
I don't have that one. Yet.
Well, you know, if you talk to me next week, I may be using something different. So I don't have any allegiance necessarily to a color. If I find something better. Now I'm going to use that mix I was talking about before, the raw umber violet and the ultramarine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about these big leaf areas throwing shadow down onto the trunk of the tree. So that would be obviously right under the areas that are overhanging the trunk. And then I'm going to bring this, I'm going to get a little more of the raw umber violet in the mix. And now I'm going to use the darker value to shadow the right side of the tree and leave some sunlight on the left side where the sun's coming from. And again, I don't go too far with it because again, you can always add more dark later on in the painting. So I just do enough to get the feeling of 3 dimensions and where the sun is coming from. And this part of the tree here would have quite a bit of shadow on it. This right here. And then I will add more later, but for now, I'm going to keep it about there. And I'm just going to smudge it a little bit here, and this will blend it in a little bit. And now I'm going to bring that.
What kind of finger was that?
Any finger that works, it doesn't matter. Now I'm going to bring some more of that shadow up into the tops of the trees. I usually do the branches on the tops of my trees dark. We're going to have other trees behind here, and we can imagine some trees outside the picture plane, which are going to be throwing some shadow on the tops of the trees. I find that by shadowing or making dark branches at the top and having sunlight at the bottom, it brings the eye in where you want it to be, which is more into the middle of the painting. And I'm going to add more smaller branches later, but again, I don't go too far too fast with some of these things. I leave myself some room for improvisation later on. Bring this one up a little bit more, and split it up at the top. Let's bring this one up a little bit more. And this one here could come up a little more. Get a few more coming out of here. Okay, that's enough for now. Now let me get a little shadow going on the stone wall. The sun is going to be behind the stone wall, so again I'm going to mix that same mixture again, this time a little bit more on the blue side. I'm going to leave a little sunlight on it. Whoops, a little too dark. Okay, let's get a little more of the raw umber violet on that. I'm going to leave a little sunlight on the tops of the stones here, some of the stones, where they're facing the source of light. And this part of the wall is pretty much all in shadow. And we'll put a little bit of darker value on these stones here. For now, I don't know, some of these are going to be probably in a big shadow that's coming across from another tree, but for now, I'll just treat them as if they're in the sunshine. Okay. Alrighty. Now, what I want to do is put some leaves on this tree here and get some shadow on that going. Now that tree, this tree is going to be a secondary tree, so I don't want to make it as bright as the main tree. So what I'm going to do is take some alizarin and some Windsor orange, and I'm going to throw some leaf shapes on this tree. And this tree might have a bit more of its leaves still intact. And same process here. This is going to be the sunlit value of these red leaves, so that when this dries up enough, I will do the same thing as I did to these leaves here. Okay, now I'm gonna, while I'm waiting for that to dry up, I'll put some shadow on this tree like I did for the other tree. All right, now we'll just leave it like that for now, and I'll come back to that later and put some more on that. Okay, while I have this dark here, I'm gonna fill in some of this dark area, and here's where the wood pile is. So I'm gonna put the dark interior in here, and just leave a little bit of that initial value for the wood pile. Okay, now what I want to do is put in some background trees, and again, these trees are not going to be as prominent as the other trees. So what I'm going to do is just take a brush full of raw umber violet and some of this orange that I used on this tree. And I'm just going to put in a background here of some more trees that are actually browner than my first trees. I want to be careful to paint around my sunlit areas on the big tree. I'm going to leave some of that blue there for now, and then I'll just put something else in there later. And part of the reason for doing an area like this is to calm this area down so you don't have so much stuff jumbling around fighting for attention to the eye. When you want to calm an area down, you bring the values in close together, and that's what I'm going to be doing here, and I'll be working on this more and more. And towards the end, I'll look at an area like this and decide how much darker it has to be, if at all. I got my finger, I got my hand in a little pink.
You like the square format that you're using?
Yeah, you know, I started doing this a few years ago. I got tired of just doing rectangles, and I said, let me try a square. And I like it because it allows a nicer design a lot of times. We're so used to using the rectangle that we sort of forget about how interesting a square could be. It becomes just this neutral area that you can fill up almost any way you want and design the things in it with a little more, I don't know, to me it just kind of looks better at times. Not everything is good, you know, as a square, but the industrial piece that I did that I got the prize with, that was a square. Yeah. Sometimes also, as watercolorists, we're lucky in the fact that a lot of times we paint an area, we paint a painting, and then we wind up putting in all kinds of stuff that we didn't really need. So if you take a smaller mat, a square mat, a lot of times you get a better painting just by trying a different mat on it. I remember a painting that I did a few years ago that was in a show out where I live. I started out as a full sheet, and it was a snow scene, and I was doing it. Need a little more orange than that. And as I was doing it, I realized there was fewer and fewer areas that I really needed in the painting, and it wound up being a half sheet when I was finished, because I kept matting it down smaller as I was going along, and I realized I didn't need everything that I had in there. the gist of the painting, the part of the painting that was the most interesting was was when I matted out. I'll add a little more of this red in here, give it a little more color. This is like watching a house being built. The foundation is usually not the most exciting part, so bear with me. Okay, let's see, let's get this down a little bit more. I don't like the way that top looks, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to feather this out a little bit so it looks a little more leafy. And bring this down a little bit here. Okay.
That was pretty much a wet brush.
Yeah, pretty very wet brush. Yeah, I like to use enough water so that I'm not scraping. You know, when you scrape, that's good for texturing and all, but it's not so good when you're putting down areas of wash like this. You wind up getting some stuff happening that it's not as attractive. Okay, so that's going to stay like that for a while. Actually, I should put some down here now. So I haven't painted this painting before. I've painted paintings like it, so I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. So I don't have everything here fully worked out as far as what's going to go where. What I'm trying to do is get rid of some of that sky. And again, provide a nice dark backdrop for hopefully the excitement in the barn. Okay, now what I want to do is a little more work on the tree, and then I'm going to wind up throwing some shadow on the barn, and hopefully that'll start getting things looking even better. Now, I want to put a little bit of a darker value here and there in the dark areas of the leafy parts of the tree. You can usually get a good feeling of the third dimension and a good feeling of reality if you use three values to make that third dimension. As long as you have a light value, a middle value, and a dark value, you set it all. You can have a lot of middle values, but you got to have at least one middle value. And now a few more little darks here and there on the tree. As you can see, the initial shadow I put down has gotten a bit lighter, which is what happens with watercolor. Generally, it'll dry lighter, and that gives me room to put in a few more very dark areas here. And then also on this tree, what I'm going to do is we're going to have some shadow coming down from the overhanging leaf areas onto the trunk of the tree. And hopefully that'll create a little bit of interest on the trunk. Okay. Now before I do that, I think what I want to do is, before I do the barn, I'm going to, let's see, this should be dry enough now. I'm going to put a little secondary value on these trees here. So now I want to keep my darks a little more ultramarine. I want to keep my darks around my big tree here. So these are going to be the dark areas of the trees that are behind this tree. And I'm using again the raw umber violet, using ultramarine blue, and I'm using some of that orange again. Okay, that looks pretty decent. Again, I'm always thinking where
The
the,
brushes that you use, how do you find the points hold up?
I can't hear you.
The Cheap Joe's brushes that you use, how do you find the points hold up?
Oh, they hold up well if you don't abuse them. That's one of the reasons that's one of the reasons I use these brushes. They have a nice very sharp point, which in watercolor is a great help. They also spring back to life very well. See how, oh, I should do it here where you can see it. See how it springs back? A sable brush doesn't always do that. It doesn't spring back quite as easily. The nylons do. So this is a combination of the two. So you get the spring of a nylon brush, and you get the water and paint holding of a sable. Plus, sables are very expensive, and you wind up, no matter how careful you are, you wind up losing the points on them pretty quickly. So that's why I use these. All right, that's enough for there. Now I want to do some work on the foreground and the grass. First thing I'm going to do, now the green I'm going to be using for the shadow on the grass, shadows, is a green, it's a Winsor Newton green, it's called Perline green, P-E-R-L-Y-N-E. And it's a sort of a dead green, it's not a lively green, but it's good for shadows, especially when you're using a bright green like this. Now, the stone wall will be casting some shadow onto the grass. It's going to throw shadow on that rock too, but I don't want to make it green. Now I'm just going to flip the dark green up a little bit to make it look like some grass and whatever's growing there. And then I'm also going to imagine that there's some trees and whatever that are casting shadow across the wall and onto the grass here. And when you're doing something like a shadow, what you're really doing is creating, hopefully, some interesting areas in the sunlight. Shadows are less important than the areas of sunlight you leave. So as I'm doing the shadow, I'm actually thinking about what I'm leaving in the sunlight. Now this tree is also going to be casting a shadow back onto the barn. So might as well put that in now. It's going to go about to there, and that's where the grass was going to end. And now what I want to do, and we're also going to have a shadow here. I might as well put that in now. That's going to be on the grass from the piece of barn there. Now I want to go back to my large brush. What I always like, not always, but what I often do in a painting is I'll put a nice dark shadow in the foreground that acts as a threshold into the painting, because the eye is always drawn to the light areas in the painting, and by darkening the foreground with a nice shadow, you can accomplish that. Now, what I'm going to do is just paint in a big area at the bottom here. And then as I get up into the area that I want to stay sunlight, I'll try to design a nice edge to it so that it looks like the shadow's being cast by a tree outside the picture plane. Fortunately, I don't have a lot of paint in a lot of this perline left. I'm leaving these rocks sunny because the shadow on the rock should not be green. So I'll wait and shadow those later. Okay, so now let's see what I can do. I'm just going to throw some lines across here and see what happens. Okay, that's not bad. What do you think?
Good. Looking good. It's a
Okay.
lot different than when you first started.
See, again, what I'm trying to do is design a nice area of sunlight. And I'll probably do some more here later on. But now I gotta go back to my hair dryer, because if I don't, I'm gonna make a mess. All right, that should do it. Just get rid of these blobs here on the end. All right, now on to the barn. Okay, now for my barn, again, I'm going to use for the shadows on the barn. I'm going to use the ultramarine blue and the raw umber violet. Mix a nice juicy amount with a lot of water on the palette. Let me show you that on the screen, okay? And a little bit more to the brown side. Now I'm going to think what this tree would be doing as far as casting shadow to the barn, okay? It's casting shadow back that way. I'm going to continue on where it was casting it to the grass. Then when it hits the vertical wall of the barn, the shadow is going to run up the barn. That's a common sound I hear at demonstrations. Ah!
Be brave, be brave. It'll dry lighter, right?
Now again, with the shadow, the object is not the shadow so much, it's what you leave, not in shadow, it's the sunlight. And you know, when trees cast shadows this way, they become very abstract. And we're also going to have a shadow underneath the overhang of the roof, a little bit under the foundation. And now this section of the barn is further back. Let me get another, there we go. So the barn itself is going to be casting shadow onto the smaller barn area, shadow under the overhang. And then we're going to have this in shadow. Now the shadow on the roof is going to have to go darker once that dries because the roof is darker in sunlight. So the same thing is going to happen in the shadow. Get a little bit more here on the ground. Bring the shadow a little bit over here. Okay, now the woodshed in the back is going to be shadowed by the little piece of barn. And the stone wall, and then we get a little shadow under the overhang here. Okay. And then, of course, some of these trees here, you know, there may be a branch hanging over, throw a little shadow here and there. Okay, now I want to do the darker shadow on the roof. I use the same mix, but now more pigment, less water. So wherever the shadow hits on the face of the barn, it's got to come down from the roof. This should come down a little lower. This, okay. Now this should be broken up a little bit, since it's a tree and it's not a building. So we'll have this kind of come down like that. Now these two, let me dry those with the dryer. This is the fun part of the painting now. And whatever shadows I have on the roof will go darker. Now, I also have to make my shadow a bit darker on the foundation, because the foundation in sunlight is darker than the white. So wherever the shadow hits foundation color, which is going to be the stone, I darken that somewhat.
So you added the foundation color to that mix.
Well, the foundation color I already have on there.
Did the mic fall off?
I don't know, did it? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's try it. It's too close to.
Okay. Yeah, the foundation, I had a value on the foundation already, which was darker than the white. And of course, wherever the shadow falls on something darker, it has to go darker. Okay. So now what I want to do is keep working on this area here, bring it out as much as possible, using the same combination again of the ultramarine and raw violet. So I'm putting in some dark notes on the tree itself. And I want to get some of these branches up on top darker. I kind of bounce around. My eye kind of looks here, there, and everywhere, and I see something, and I bounce back and forth. Okay, now what I want to do is put a little more tone on the sunlit part of the tree, something in between what's there as far as shadow and sunlight. I want to kill all the sunlight. I want to have a nice mottled effect. Now, I'm going to put a little color where that blue is. I'll try some orange first and see how that looks. See if we have some more trees further in the distance. I get that a little darker on that side. I haven't put any shadows on the tree trunks here yet. We'll get to those. This a little darker. Okay, now let me get to the rocks, which I haven't shadowed yet. These rocks are all going to be in shadow, so they're going to go down in value. This one here could be partly in sun. Okay, and now we have the shadow here that I should extend over. Okay. Now a little detail on the stone wall. Again, same mix. I'm going to make some dark crevices on the stone wall. Then the wall will most likely have to go down in value just a little bit more. The watercolor always dries a little bit lighter depending on the color. And it gives you a little leeway if you think you've done it, you've got your value a little bit too dark, it'll generally dry a little lighter anyway, so. Oh, we got the stone there that should be also shadowed. Now I have these little areas of white paper that are kind of sticking up that I didn't quite cover, so I'm just going to use the point of the brush to just eliminate those. And I got a few little things here and there that are drawing my eye that I don't want to. Okay. Let's see, now we're going to get some action on this tree. I haven't worked on that in a while. Can you still hear me? Yep.
Yes.
All right, I'll use some alizarin and some ultramarine. And we'll put the darker areas on this tree. Take the sunlight down off the trunk here, which isn't really necessary. And throw a little dark back here. I'm using the same logic as far as where I'm putting my darks. I'm always thinking where the sun is, so there's going to be, again, the shape of the object that I'm working on, making a sunnier side and a darker side. Okay, now this one, I want to get a little darker here, darker over here, and we need some darks. The darks that I put in before have lightened up a bit, so let me darken those up a bit. And put a little shadow on some of these trees here. these trees will be subject to a lot of cast shadow also. And let me get a little more dark value on the stone wall. Get that stone covered. Okay, now we got a stone wall back here too that I didn't do anything with, but this is mostly in sunlight, a little part here in shadow. I probably should have left that one alone. And we've got a couple little windows in the barn. I can get to that. Put some panes on the windows. I'm going to use some raw sienna again. And then wherever the shadow hits the window, they have to go darker. A few little details here and there on the barn. There's a little door here. So you get some darker lines there. I want to darken up underneath the shadow here. I want to get this a little bit cleaner. And the doorway here, a little bit of detailing around it. Little step here. Go back into here, get these a little darker. Straighten this out a little bit. A little bit of a dark note here. Let's get a little dark over here. I have another stone wall there that I forgot about. Too many stone walls in this painting.
Great.
Yeah, let's get some shadow on that. This is the wood piles. Okay, now a little bit more work on the stones here. Let's get a few little darker areas in the stones. And what I want to do is I want to darken some of the areas here on the left of the painting. Again, we're going to imagine trees outside the picture plane here, and they're going to throw some shadow on the leafy areas of the tree. Let's see. I'm just going to hold this up for a second so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Take out some of that sunlight there. And I think what we need is a little more oomph on the on the dark green. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up the tree with a lot of smaller branches. Now again, the green has dried up quite a bit lighter. So I'm going to darken certain areas of it. The shadow should be darker, closer to whatever's casting it. And more light will fill it as it travels farther away from the object. So I want to make sure the shadow is darkest on the left. Now I'm just going to brush out the paint and then use that to go over the sunlight. Some dry brushing. Actually, a little bit more there. This will knock down the brightness of the green a bit, plus give it some texture. And I want to do the same thing with, where's my other brush? With the area, the area in front of the barn. I'll use a brown instead. Maybe a little bit more dark green here. Okay, now I'm going to take a small brush and do a little detailing on the tree, main tree. Mix up some nice dark. And while I'm doing that, I can, oh, let me dry this first, sorry. Yeah, of course. Okay, so now I'm mixing up some nice dark, again, the same two colors that I've been using. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just noodle or tickle the tree to get it to look as nice as I want it. Add a few more little branches here and there. What I'm doing now is I'm taking a look at some of the branches, and if there's a little bit of adjustment has to be made, I'm doing that. Bringing a little dark here right next to the sunlight so that it brings the sunlight out a little bit more. And I've got a branch here that can come out. Here. Bring a few branches out this way. Fat one there, coming down. Branch in the front. There. And let's see what else. Some little dark notes in there. Little dark notes here and there for texture on the rocks on the tree. And then, of course, these farm trees always have some stuff growing around them. Well, it's pretty dark there, so I don't know if you can see much of it, but
How do you know the angle of the shadow?
well, you gotta look at shadows. Like if we got a nice sunny day like today, take a look at a building, take a look at the tree, and see what happens. And
For example, what I'm looking at.
see, a shadow follows whatever it falls on. So when it's on the ground, it goes this way. When it hits a wall, it goes up the wall. Now, that if the tree is right in front of the wall, it's going to be like a mirror image. If the tree is at an angle, now the shadow is going to go this way or that way. So you got to look. I just want to do a little bit more on the leaf area. I also want to darken these stones a little bit more. Still have a little bit too much sunlight on them. I want to put a few put a few darker leafy areas on the tree here too. Get a little more blue in that. That's not too much. These are some of the leaves that are maybe on the other side of the tree that aren't getting any sunlight. Put a few here on the edges. A couple more in here. And then a little bit of shadow here and there. Again, this tree's not immune to, shadows from other trees too. So we'll take a little shadow and just shadow some of the sunlight. And then we'll put a few little stones on the foundation. Are you getting tired? You want me to finish this up? Huh?
Knowing when to stop.
I don't want to put everybody to sleep. So now I'm just going to put a few little slashes on the foundation to show us like stones. What's that?
Sign it.
I can keep going, but just wait 1 second. I'll throw it in the frame for you so you can see better. Okay. There you go. Oh, okay.